And so when it comes to fitness and health over a long period of time, and I still have not really heard a better explanation of what that is than I think Bergeron, I'm not sure if he was the first to say it, but the low trajectory to a distant horizon is the mindset that I approach health and fitness with, which is that I want to be able to do these things for a long period of time. And what are these things? It's to get out of breath and not be debilitated by it. Basically, I think there are three main reasons to exercise. It's to sweat, to move blood, and to get out of breath. And that if you do those things regularly, that a lot of the biomarkers that you referred to that are going to be requiring, that your body will require to live a productive lifestyle over a long period of time, that you're checking the boxes to do that.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Invictus Mindset Podcast. Today's guest is a writer and analyst for the Morning Chalk Up. He's also a production team member for the CrossFit Games media team and a regular on the Savon podcast as well as The Bottom Line. None other than Brian Friend. What's up, man?
Hey, Bryce. Thank you, man. I really appreciate this.
Really excited to chat with you today. As we kind of talked a little bit offline, CrossFit never has any shortage of drama, and you seem to do an amazing job kind of keeping up with it and writing some really impressive articles and chatting on all the major podcast platforms. So we're excited to have you today.
It's a global sport that's still in some of the infant stages. There's a lot of growing pains. I think that there's a lot of positive, movement, and even though there are those areas of contention and drama that for the most part people are wanting to see success in this, in the growth and evolution of this. And but yeah, sometimes that can get lost
for sure.
in
it's
the mix
cool
for a period of time.
Because I love the way you describe that. You have a very good lens on the sport, and it is important to note that CrossFit it's still in its infant stages. It's not necessarily on the same conversation, as I like to allude to often, as the World Surf League or the X Games yet. Could potentially be headed that way. Could be very similar to tennis and golf in some capacities, in the future. But what are your thoughts as to where CrossFit could go? Do you think those are roughly good analogies?
Yeah, I mean, in each of those instances, there are things that you could certainly point to as similarities. Personally, I also draw a lot of similarities to disc golf and the booming that disc golf has seen in the last couple of years, but also the fact that, for just being pretty honest, there's not that many people that are going to want to watch 6 hours of disc golf coverage on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday afternoon.
Totally.
And there's not a lot of people that are going to take 6 hours out of their day to watch a CrossFit competition for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and digest all of it. So, it's something that I often think about, because in disc golf, there is opportunity to do that if you want to, but to digest it, there's also post-production. And I'm always wondered if CrossFit would do something like that to obviously still be available to people who want to watch for that duration of time, the diehard fans maybe, but then for people who only would be like, man, if I could, I have an hour on a Monday evening with my wife, and maybe we could watch this post-production show of what happened at X competition over the weekend. But if you're asking me to go scroll through YouTube videos over and over that are hours long, or sometimes 12 and 13 hours long, these just massive productions, I just think that it's not going to happen. So depends on the lens you look at, which sport it might be most similar to. It's different than a lot of sports in the regard that you can't do it every weekend. You really probably shouldn't even be doing it every month, even though some people try to. And I don't know that we actually know what the lifespan of an elite level athlete in this sport really is yet.
Yeah, there's so many good points there, Brian. The first one being, is CrossFit spectator friendly? And you alluded to this concept of having to scroll through a YouTube video, not to mention when you're looking at the field of play. In many events, it's hard to know the sequence. Where are people located? I know the live feed tries to update it based on points and rep count that they're loosely hearing from the judges, but I'm very spoiled in the sense that a lot of my friends are out there getting after it. So I have this personal connection and relationship. And I think there's a lot that listen to our podcast that can relate to that. But if you're on the outside looking in, it seems like this jumble of kind of unique and high level fitness that isn't always conceptualized or understood. What would be some major points for you to give gentle feedback as to how to make CrossFit a little bit more spectator friendly?
Well, another sport that I've had some exposure to over the last couple of years, a friend of mine, he grew up doing supercross and motocross. Mm-hmm. And so I started during the pandemic. I was, as everyone did, you just kind of got a small group of people that you were comfortable hanging out with. And I watched like every supercross race with them 2 winters ago, I think. And supercross is similar to CrossFit in a couple of aspects. One is which there's 20 plus athletes often competing at one time on the same course, and it's not, if you just have a wide still shot of it, you can't really appreciate everything that's going on. But if you have a close up on only the leader, you also are losing a lot of the storyline. In supercross, on the left side of the screen, they just have a running placement, and every time you pass by a lap, your placement is adjusted, and you can see how far ahead or behind you are from the leader. And in that sense, if you're watching from home, and even if your favorite athlete or your training partner is in 10th, 12th, 15th, 18th place, you know what place they're in throughout the entire race, and you can see whether they're moving up or down. It's also nice for the commentators, because if all of a sudden the guy who's in 3rd drops to 12th, and they didn't happen to see it because maybe they had a camera on another cool thing that was going on, or maybe a crash that had happened, then they can go back and kind of find what happened using some of their other cameras, but they see it happening in real time on the leaderboard. Mm-hmm. I think that the technology is there in CrossFit, and I know other people have talked about this too, to have some like different check-ins in the workout using the scoring mechanisms that we have, timing chips, etc., where it would be possible, and frankly probably not that difficult, to show more of just the overall placements from beginning to end of the workout. I do know some things that probably a lot of people don't know who haven't worked in the behind the scenes about how revolutionary it was for CrossFit to have what they call the hat at the top that shows it generally shows the top 5 in a workout for CrossFit. But if the athletes you want to support are not in the top 5, you really won't have much of an idea where they are for the entire workout. And I think that it would be a pretty simple fix to just change that from being a horizontal to being a vertical, where you could have more athletes' names on the screen at once, and then have a better understanding of that progression. Because even some of the best athletes, and I think Justin Medeiros is a great example of this, often starts the workouts outside of the top 5. Yeah. And then over the course of time, he's working his way towards the top and finishing inside the top 5, even though he's not often winning a workout. And I think if more people at home got a chance to see the progression of that as he goes from 12th to 9th to 6th to finally finishing in 4th in a workout, that they could appreciate that it's not just his fitness, but it's his execution in the workout that's allowing him to have these consistent finishes towards the top.
That's a really good point. It also alludes to the story concept of understanding pacing and knowing his personal abilities, when to expend that energy appropriately and when not to. There's a lot of really cool points there. I also think, when you're looking at just the varying divisions, a lot of people want to support team. A lot of people want to support individual. What do you think can be done on the YouTube feed? Maybe like gentle checkpoints when you're scrolling through, because oftentimes you're scrolling through and you're kind of guessing, which I have high motivation to do so because I personally want to see friends and loved ones. But for people that are just like, hey, what's this CrossFit thing? I saw it on YouTube. I want to check this out. I saw my friend post about it. What do you think can be some gentle checkpoints to, kind of reel in some of the outside community to help popularize and support something that we both love so much?
Yeah, there are, competitions or media outlets that will go back in and put those little, I don't know what they're called on YouTube, but where's a space, or in the description, they'll say, if you want to see, Heat 4 men's event 1, you can just scroll to this timestamp and do it. So there are sometimes that's done, which is definitely helpful. And when it is done, I often use that when going back to review competitions or see something that I wasn't able to see live for whatever reason, even if I was there. But not every competition does it. It's just a time investment and resource investment to go back after the fact and have someone do that. I think it's worthwhile to do it because it's more likely then. I mean, obviously, if you're putting something on YouTube, you're hoping people will watch it. And if it's an 8-hour stream, it's unlikely that they're going to watch the whole 8 hours after the fact. And if they want to go find something specific, you're giving them the best opportunity to do that. in the shortest amount of time in a world with a decreasing attention span.
Yeah.
So it's probably a good idea to do it if you want people to watch your stuff, and it's pretty easy. I think it's easy to do it, but it just takes a little bit of time and care.
Yeah, for sure. We're a few weeks or a month or so outside of the CrossFit Games, and I'd love to kind of hear your recap thoughts on how the event was run. It was the first time underneath the tutelage of Adrian Bosman. I felt like he did a pretty cool job. I felt like program design was pretty good. Like anything, you can always look back and, I wish we would have done this better or that better. We can talk about, the lap challenge on the biking event, but overarching, Brian, what were your thoughts on the CrossFit Games here in 2022?
Well, to keep it general, I think that it was that the games team, especially from a programming perspective, did a really good time, especially considering the time frame they were given to do it. It's not if you've been paying attention over the years, Dave Castro had plans in his mind, months and years ahead of time that then would come to fruition. I do think that Adrian Bosman also has probably had thoughts in his mind for years and years about things that he would love to see. I'm sure that he having such a good relationship with Dave over the years and an intimate relationship did have an influence on some of the ways that events played out. I think that Dave, it wasn't Dave had a group of people that he would talk to, and Adrian was amongst those when trying to program the games every year, especially as it became more and more popular and more important for him to check certain boxes in terms of viewability, digestibility, for the average person to follow it. That's actually where I think that there's an opportunity for improvement going forward, is for the games team, the games programming team, to have more experts in their areas involved in the planning for the games. And what I mean by that is an expert in broadcast, an expert in scoring, an expert in judging, an expert from the medical team, an expert from the equipment team, Rogue, for example, that they have these workouts and they lay them out. And, one person could potentially do this. I've actually done a similar role than this. I call it a competition consultant, where you're not involved in the programming at all. Instead, you're given the programming, and your job from your vantage point and your area of expertise of all those things I laid out is to poke holes in it, to say, this is a sweet test, but from a broadcast perspective, this is our biggest challenge. From a scoring perspective, this is where we could run into some problems. From a medical point of view, I'm not sure that this is really a safe layout. And you have those conversations with a trusted field of experts in each of their disciplines, because I think what you'd end up having in a lot of cases is that in a certain workout, most of those people would be like, this is great and we can pull this off. And one or two of them would say, from a judging perspective, this is really tough. So if we're going to do this, these are our concerns, and let's address that ahead of time so that we can prep our judges to be successful on the field of play, so that we're and of course the entire goal of this is to eliminate problems before they happen. So I think that's an area that could potentially be improved upon, and I actually think that there's some positive things suggesting to me that stuff like that could happen.
Yeah, for sure, because it's also enhancing the spectatorship, as we mentioned, but also, just like you said, a little bit of playing devil's advocate. Right? Because sometimes the visionary art side of program design looks really cool from an energy system or a test for the athletes, but then the execution is just like, oh man, this is all over the place. As a spectator, I have no idea what's going on here. I really like that perspective there, and just kind of synergizing a little push and pull between the creative and the execution. And that way it can, on the other side, it's very, very, like, kind of decreases some of the error that can potentially take place as well, which is incredibly important in my humble opinion. This episode is brought to you by Mush. My friends over at Mush created an incredibly cool product of ready-to-eat overnight oats. And for those of you that listen to the podcast often, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And Mush has done just that, as their products have no more than 7 clean ingredients that are dairy-free, gluten-free, with no added sugar. Mush started right here at Invictus, as they had a vision to create convenient, healthy, and clean nutrition. And this landed them on Shark Tank, where the famous Mark Cuban invested in them. Now they're found in retailers all over the country, including Costco, Sprouts, Target, and Whole Foods. Check out my friends over at www.eatmush.com. Trident Coffee is sponsoring this episode of the Invictus Mindset Podcast. My guys over at Trident taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good and bad, and everything in between. At Trident, they're storytellers. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. They help create connections through symbology and storytelling that engage their customers on an emotional level, and this distinguishes them from other coffee brands. You can find Trident in Imperial Beach and in Coronado. They offer over 14 plus nitro cold brews along with dairy-free options. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from their keto bakery. All of these options will allow you to support your health and fitness journey with Trident Coffee. They're more than just a coffee company. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code Invictus20 for 20% off online and in tap rooms. Once again, that's tridentcoffee.com. Use code Invictus20 for 20% off online and in tap rooms. Take your coffee experience to the next level. Two important factors for us over at Invictus Mindset are true care and attention to detail. My friends over at RX Smart Gear have been bringing innovative fitness tools to the market since 2009. From their award-winning Evo speed ropes to their amazing gymnastics grips to their line of inflatable fitness equipment, they're constantly looking to problem solve within the fitness industry. They're always allowing us to have our gear work for us rather than against us. Hop on over to RX Smart Gear and use discount code Invictus Mindset to shop their latest cutting-edge gear. Have your gear work with you and not against you. Looking back at some of the specific events from the games, did you have any particular favorites? Everybody really loved the energy, the vibe from the Capitol. Obviously you had the jerk blocks out there, which looked pretty cool. There were some really fun events. The double under crosses were obviously talked about a lot, the traversing on the parallel bars. Anything stand out to you as I kind of mentioned some of those things?
From a personal experience being there, I was actually shocked at how much I became invested in the sandbag ladder. And I've been fortunate enough to be present at a lot of CrossFit events over the last few years. And there have been few times that I've felt a similar level of passion, excitement, and almost like I was being drawn into the event that I did during that one. So from an emotional standpoint, I guess that one kind of stands out.
That's cool.
So, obviously like you mentioned, that Capitol event will go down as one of the greatest events ever from a not just a programming perspective, but in an execution perspective. And if people have speculated about this, the task that it was to pull that off from a broadcast point of view is way more daunting than I probably even understand. And I know that the broadcast has been taking some heat in some other areas this year, some of which I think they can improve upon. But in a lot of cases, I don't necessarily think it's their fault. And so when you talk about the jerk blocks, I know that was a workout or a combination of workouts, since it was two scored events, that Adrian Bosman was so excited for. And he was really, really hyped and high on this event. But I think that some of this other stuff we were talking about, it was really hard or impossible for anyone to actually digest what was happening in real time. And that's unfortunate, because I think that could have been a really great event. And then as a result, we kind of lost, in the sandbag ladder, the excitement was real, but you also knew what was going on. It was very clear. You're either in or you're out, and then the field's narrowing. So sometimes I wonder, and I've often wondered this about with off-season events too, what is the appropriate balance between the test and getting through the workout. You know, you have a limited time domain on a field of play because it's not just the elite athletes. There's tons of other people that have to filter through North Park that day, or a Wadapalooza Flagler stage, or whatever the competition is. And at times I think that, you know, the competitions are forced to favor the test at the expense of the digestibility of it, and sometimes the other way around as well.
No, I think you bring up some really good points. My gentle controversial thought, though, is this, and I've seen this a ton, especially recently. I call it the fake fitness approach, and that is there's some really high-level athletes that have some really good videographers that they cut up their videos and they look really fit with some of the gymnastics complexity, the contours of their body, how they move a heavy barbell, and it satisfies the attention span of the consumer. But then when they get out to the field of play and there's those long rucks, those heavy carries, the long runs that from a logistical standpoint are an absolute nightmare for the broadcast team. But it really exposes the people that are just seeking that Instagram social media validation. And so I kind of think of this topic as fake fitness because I've seen it a lot, especially over the last 3 years. You got a little smirk on your face because you're seeing it too. What are your thoughts on this little bit?
Well, one of the things I've been investigating more and more closely this year is programming, and like the totality of programming a competition. And we're just coming off of the Madrid CrossFit Championship, in which there was a very limited scope of fitness tested. All the workouts were between 2 and 12 minutes, and there were 8 workouts over 3 days. And so then I think to what you're talking about, and a moment in my experience from this past CrossFit Games stands out, and this was during the Capitol event where I was out on the running course, and the athletes had to do a full lap before heading out towards the Capitol. And so they've done 20 pig flips and ran about a mile. They have 2+ miles to go, and then all the stuff at the Capitol. And I see Guimayeros coming down the pipeline there on the pavement, passing by the stadium to head out on his run to the Capitol building. And he's, you know, the kind of guy that you think about flashy, and you think about fast, and you think about strong and powerful. So a 3+ mile run in the middle of some heavy object implements, and he's not running in a pack. He's all by himself. He's got this bucket head on, preventing him from the sun. And I was just watching his face, and I don't know how to describe it any other way than misery. It just looked like this is the absolute last thing that I want to be doing right now. And maybe it was, but that is so important to me in terms of testing fitness, because you know this from competing in the days that you have and being around all those people, that there's a massive mental component to fitness, and that whatever the workout is, I mean, and it could be the total opposite, right? It could be Haley Adams lining up for the clean running workout knowing, well, my running is completely irrelevant because I can't even lift this first barbell, but I'm going to have to go do this run, come back in here, and these 10,000 people in the stadium are going to watch me fail and fail and fail. And how do you cope with that mentally? Or Guimayeros being like, I don't want to be running 3 miles in the hot sun by myself right now, but this is part of the test. And to your original question about one of my favorite workouts of the competition when I first saw all the workouts was up and over, which has been barely talked about at all. And it was the ring muscle-ups and the GHD sit-ups and the grind, getting over a variety of objects. The problem with that workout is it was right after the Capitol. And the Capitol, you know, created so much drama and lore, not just in the test, but then the way that it ended up playing out and with the final finisher and that drama of all of that. It also crushed the athletes. And so coming back and doing that workout 2.5 hours later, a lot of people, they weren't even sure like what was going to happen if I could do a ring muscle-up. And so I think that I thought that was a great test on paper, but I think that its placement in the weekend ended up being just a survive for the most of the athletes instead of a thrive, which we could have seen from some of them otherwise, and also just kind of lost in the mix with workouts. That happens to certain workouts at the games every year because of what it was kind of sandwiched between. Yeah,
the placement absolutely matters. And another thing that I think is very important for spectators and consumers of the sport of CrossFit to understand is the logistics matter. Oftentimes these athletes are corralled roughly 1 hour before their event. The bathroom is inconveniently located. You know, their warm-up may take place, but then they stand around for 10, 15 minutes before taking the field of play. Sometimes there's weather conditions like the lightning scare. It's not the same test as, oh yeah, I saw that workout, did it in my gym, and then executed and beat all the top athletes because I had my favorite barbell, my favorite pull-up bar, the assault bike that's a little faster than some of the other ones. You know what I'm saying? It's an interesting dichotomy there for sure.
And this actually was a thought I was having a few minutes ago. In the context of all of these things, what I always want, because I originally was a fan of the sport and still am a fan of the sport, and the reason I like going to the events live, whether I'm working at them or not, and the reason why I like watching them on TV when I can't be there, is to see what the athletes can do. And I think that this is often neglected by competitions, even at the highest level. I think some do a much better job than others, but are you setting up this scenario for an event to take place and the athletes to show to their fullest potential how good they are or how good they can be? And this is something that I've been critical of from a season layout format, where you have some athletes qualifying for the games on May 22nd and others being invited to the games on July 15th. That's crazy. I mean, that is totally crazy. And I know there's other sports where you qualify for things at different time periods, but those sports are not CrossFit. And if you know on May 22nd that you have the biggest competition of the year on August 1st, that is such an advantage in terms of the ability to train and prepare and plan, not just for your fitness, but the logistics and the stress around planning to get there from wherever you might be coming from around the world, to have a place to stay, for it not to be a financial burden, to make sure that your coach or family can be there. If you have another job, to make sure that that thing's accounted for. And then obviously in the more minutia of when you're there, are these athletes giving the opportunity to get ready to go take the field of play and compete well? And you think about, for example, a workout like the finale of Rogue last year, where the men have to do some double unders and then they have to go cycle 205 squat snatches real fast under pressure of time, and they haven't touched a barbell in 30 minutes. That's insane. You have the best athletes in the world. Set them up for success. You know they can all do it. If you want to see how well they can do it, having them stand around and do nothing for 30 minutes is not really the best way. But as an athlete and a coach, if that's the landscape and you know that, a lot of them are practicing that way. And their coach will tell them, hey, we're going to do this workout, and go and warm up for it. And then they'll say, okay, you're ready to go? Good. We're going to start in 20 minutes. You don't do anything for the next 20 minutes. Because if that's how it's going to be in the competition, why wouldn't you practice it?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds really good to prepare and practice that way, but I'd also still argue around the physiology, right? Mentally, you still have that pre-workout anxiety, and you're trying to prime your muscle fibers, probably have a little bit of at least attempting to have a sustained adrenaline dump. But, how do you create a perfect scenario where oftentimes you're standing around because of production reasons and, other logistical things associated with the competition. And then on the other side of the coin, it's like you want to speed up the transition from warm up to competition. What do you think is the best bridge to kind of actionably be solution oriented there? Because it's a little bit of a challenge from two different lenses within the space.
Definitely. If you know it's going to be like that and you're practicing it, that's great. Is it optimal either way? No, It's not. And I think that's what we're talking about now. It's one of the areas I have the least experience with in terms of competitions. Like, I've never been involved in athlete control. I never really spend any time in the athlete warm-up area. And I never am standing there in the corrals observing what's going on, because I'm out on the field of play, or I'm, preparing for the event that's about to happen in some capacity. So it is an area that I feel like less qualified to talk about than many others. But I guess I honestly would have to pass on this one. I'll have to defer to someone who has an understanding of why do the athletes need to be standing in the corral for 20 minutes before they take the field of play.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, I really love that you passed on that, because so many people that I've had on would have danced around and came up with a unique explanation. I think that's the first pass we've ever had on this podcast. So well played, sir.
As you're asking it, usually when people ask these questions, like, something's happening in my mind and I'm like, hey, I could talk about that. And this is one where I just realized I don't have any experience with that. Yeah. I see it happening. I hear about it happening. I know that it happens. I'm not really sure why. And without talking to someone who can explain to me why, I don't know that am in a good position to offer a solution.
Yeah, for sure. You've alluded a little bit to these off-season competitions, and I can't help but relate it to AAU basketball back in the day, where you're playing all summer long, sometimes 5, 6, 7 games in one day. And it's consistently competing versus getting in the lab and training and truly tinkering with, oh man, this last year, here were some of my holes. I need to work on some of these holes. And now with, some of the financial incentive associated with Rogue and Dubai and Madrid and Wadapalooza, the notoriety that comes with that, there's this toggling between, should I go do it? Should I go team? Should I go individual? Where's the incentive there? But then at the same time, there's not really an off season. These athletes are kind of owned by the sport year long in order to make a living. And then you see kind of the same weaknesses every single year. It's really hard to get into the lab and be like, okay, I'm going to, narrow my focus and work on these 3 things over the next 3 months. But it's tough to do so given the nature and landscape. What are your thoughts on the nature of off-season competitions, how it fits with the general CrossFit Games season?
I think it's one of the most stressful things for coaches, actually, because
there's no peaking. It's just be ready all the time.
Yeah, and you can sit down with an athlete who has said that they want you to coach them and say, "Great, this is what I think is the best plan for us to achieve the goals that you've outlined for me." And the athlete might say, "Well, okay, but I also want to do these 2 competitions in this time of the year." Well, why do you want to do those competitions? And they have a variety of reasons for that. And then as a coach, you have to decide, okay, am I going to tell them, no, you can't, if you want to work with me, you're not doing those competitions, and risk them leaving when coaching this athlete might be the best opportunity of your coaching career? Or do you bite your tongue and say, okay, we'll get ready for those competitions, knowing that they're not going to be as good as you could make them be for that competition, or the competition that they want to be great for, which might be the games in the next season. And so from a coaching perspective, and I've spoken to some coaches who've been in this exact situation, it's really, really tough. And when you add in the fact that to compete in some of the competitions that the athletes want to compete in, they also have to earn their way to be there through these online qualifiers, even if they've already excelled at the highest level of the CrossFit Games.
Which are super hard now. These qualifiers are tough, and the logistics, because they want to ensure nobody's cheating and whatnot. You're having to weigh every single plate, film everything, make sure clocks are there, judges are there, everything is really hit to a T, otherwise you get penalized. There's a logistical nightmare on the qualifying side of things as well for coaches and athletes.
And one of the things I think that coaches, the really good coaches, are often trying to do for their athletes is mitigate stress in the athlete's life. You'll know this, of course, and a lot of people will know this, that the body can only take so much stress, and stress comes in a variety of different forms, and training is stressing on the body. And competing is even more stress on the body. And then all of those components of doing those online competitions are just additional stress. And if you're doing those 3 to 5 times a year, and you qualify for 3 to 5 off-season events, and then you also have the Open and the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the last chance qualifier maybe, and the games, if you're good enough, now you're talking about competing every month basically, which is something that we opened the show by saying is really not ideal for this sport.
Yeah, man. I think those are some really, really good points. What do you think is, obviously the athlete is wanting notoriety. They want to advance. They want opportunities to showcase what they truly believe are their skills and their fitness level. There's pressure from sponsors. They want to see them on the competition floor. They want to see their products being showcased. They want the opportunity for content creation and videography on a big stage. But then at the same time, what you described is there's the human component. There's stress management. There's life management. Maybe you have an external job or a family. What do you think is a good solution for this conversation here? Because something that I've talked about a lot is, do you have fitness or does fitness have you? And I think there's a unique relationship there where it's like you're pulled lots of different ways based on the value system, and it's really hard to make some of those decisions.
Definitely. I think that this is an area where a group of people in the fitness space, in the CrossFit space, that are often either not known about or not really understood comes into play, and that's the agents for the athletes.
I was going to say the same thing.
Because there are definitely like you said, those pressures put upon athletes by the sponsors to show up or to do a certain number of things. And I think that it's the agent's opportunity in negotiating those contracts to say, hey, you want this athlete as a part of your brand because of how good they are. But for them to be that good, they cannot compete 8 times a year. So we need to have an understanding here that yes, they're going to compete in one of the off-season events. And if you want to have an influence, if you're a big enough supporter or sponsor of them and you want to have an influence on determining which one that is, we'll consider that. But we cannot guarantee you that they're going to show up to Rogue and Dubai and Wadapalooza. That's because the product that you're looking for out of our athlete is not deliverable that many times a year. And so those conversations with sponsors at least, need to be had up front. And I think also in the coaching athlete relationship, they should be had up front. And that, maybe even in some cases, because, people can forget about those conversations, write them down and then go back to them when the tension builds and they say, but I want to do this one. And you say, look, when we first sat down and talked, these are the things you told me and we agreed upon this. And I have your best interests in mind. And so that's why I'm reminding you right now about what you told me then. Have your goals changed? And have those, just have those conversations and being able to reference back to some of the original conversations that created these relationships between coaches, agents, sponsors, etc. And I think there are also some really good examples in the sport of people who have done this very, very well. I think Brent Fikowski's career has been able to be as long as it is because he is able to keep the big picture in mind and not get sucked into the temptation as it arises competition to competition, season after season, year after year. He's very aware of what his long-term goals are in the sport, or maybe just for the next season, and he doesn't let all the small details along the way derail those things. Not everyone has the ability to do that, and if you know you don't, then you should probably put someone that you would trust and will listen to in a position proximally to you to help remind you when you forget.
Yeah, you've got such a great eye, man. You're definitely seeing a very similar picture that I am over here. And, I love seeing the peek behind the curtain with you a little bit. It really takes a village for some of these high-level athletes. They need the significant other. They need the coach. They need the agent. And it's really easy to give in to the temptation of, sponsor this, or my friend said that. And, all the CrossFit athletes, especially the high level ones, they're training together now. And there's all these varying training camps. And recently, I think you've talked about it a little bit on the Bottom Line. You've written about it with Morning Chalk Up. We've seen some of the flux within training camps. And, early on, it was Jason Hopper, Jake Marconi, and Mal O'Brien up there at HWPO. And now we just saw this huge shift of former comp train athletes. It became this storytelling narrative of Bergeron versus Frazier. Obviously, it's not too much of that, but what are your thoughts on the changing of coaches? There's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of temptation, but at the end of the day, a lot of these athletes are just looking for the vibe, the programming, and the catalyst, I guess, that's going to help get them over the hump and to that next level. What are your lenses on the jumping of ship over to HWPO for a lot of these athletes?
It's a big question because I think, personally, I think that for each of the new athletes announced there and for all the athletes that are making any changes in the off season, the reasons for making those changes are varied and vast. In general, if I'm an athlete that's trying to pursue excellence in CrossFit, I don't think that necessarily. I think that a lot of the really good coaches, there's not that much different between them. For the most part, it's just about finding an environment that is comfortable for you. And that can take a lot of different shapes and forms. And just because an environment is comfortable for you one year, it may not be comfortable for you the next year, like you said, because of potentially things outside of the CrossFit world. Amanda Barnhart seems to be a good example of this, where my understanding is that her husband got a great job opportunity back where they used to live that was really important for him to take, and he has been so supportive of her throughout her pursuit of excellence in this sport that now it was kind of maybe a no-brainer for her to support him when a great opportunity came his way. Plus, to go back home, as I've talked about in other platforms, is not that uncommon. Mm-hmm. I did that myself. I left home for like 13 years, and now I'm back living basically 5 minutes from where I grew up. Mm. And so that's happened in a lot of these. Sam Quant, similar situation. Catherine David's daughter, although I don't think she's back home in Iceland anymore. Last year, she made that kind of transition back to home after being gone for several years. And I think that it can be really easy to jump to quick criticisms or conclusions about why someone's doing something in the context of the sport without necessarily considering all the lifestyle factors that may be also playing into those decisions. I don't think they're easy decisions for the athletes or their coaches or their teams. And I think that more often than not, it's actually pretty amicable parting of the ways. Yes, there are sometimes contentious ones, but I think people want it to be that more often than it probably is.
No, I think that's really, really fair for you to describe. Life is a huge overarching part of this conversation in the sense of, the sport's really important, but it's not the NBA, it's not the MLB, it's not the NFL where, you trim the fat off of life 100% to pursue this sport, which may or may not work out. We briefly chatted on the lifespan of a traditional CrossFit athlete. I'd like to take a moment to thank our friends over at Vuori. They are bringing a new perspective on performance apparel. Their products are incredibly versatile and allow for freedom and flexibility in any arena. As humans, we are complex creatures, always on the move and always on the go. Allow Vuori to join you as you navigate the complexities of the human experience. Whether you are training, adventuring, lounging, traveling, or attending meetings, Vuori has options to suit your active lifestyle. My personal favorites are the men's core short and their line of Ponto performance products, which are so incredibly soft. Check these guys out over at vuori.com/Invictus Mindset for 20% off your very first purchase and free shipping. That's VUORI.com/Invictus Mindset for 20% off your very first purchase and free shipping. Everything they have is designed to work out in, but doesn't look or feel like it. It's so freaking comfortable that you won't want to wear anything else. Breathing, movement, circulation, digestion. What do all these body functions have in common? Our muscles. There are over 600 muscles in the human body that are responsible for supporting our daily activities. That's why your muscle health is incredibly important. On this podcast, I always discuss seeking our peak expression and striving to maximize our human potential. And so I try to share with you the top products that I find on the market. My H&B is a clinically proven ingredient that has been shown to help build and maintain lean muscle mass, increase strength, improve recovery, and enhance body composition. Learn more about your muscle health at myhmb.com/Invictus. Once again, that's myhmb.com/Invictus. Enhance your muscle health and enhance your life. And what's so interesting is I'd probably say 3 years would be the average, maybe a little bit longer. I was trying to compare and contrast some of the rankings that you put together, which I was very, very impressed with, which was, the top male and female CrossFit athletes of all time. And you included in there, how many times they've made the games, how many times they've podiumed. I thought that was really well done. Took a lot of time to put together those analytics, but showed more to at least my eye than just the sport. It showed the commitment, it showed the duration, it showed loosely some of the sacrifices that have been made for the tenure of the athlete. You look at Rebecca Voigt 10 times, plus
4 masters.
Yeah, come into the games. I mean, she was my very first coach. She's been on the show. Awesome human being, an incredible athlete. And there's others like that as well. What did it take to put together that list? And there's so much history packed into that I don't even know if we have enough time on this podcast to discuss those two ranking charts that if anybody doesn't know what I'm alluding to, check out Brian Friend's Instagram. It's under Brian Friend CrossFit. And he's got some cool rankings up on there around the top CrossFit athletes of all time, both male and female.
Yeah, the amount of work that goes into creating that is years. It's, watching the old CrossFit Games over and over again, year after year, and from different perspectives. As I learn more in the sport, it's talking to people that were around before I was, and trying to get some information. I've been really fortunate to have. The first person who gave me any real opportunity in this space was Sevan, and I still have a great relationship with him. And he's been around for so long and had such an intimate perspective of knowing Greg and Dave so well for such a long period of time. He saw this thing be born and then grow into what it's become. And, that relationship, Tommy Marquez, who I've gotten really close with over the years and has been around for a long time, Chase Ingram, Bill Grunler, guys that I've gotten to know and can call friends. But these guys have helped me form some perspective that I couldn't have had otherwise, getting to know the athletes over periods of time. And then just learning by being there, by watching. I went to the games a few times as a fan before ever having an opportunity to go there in any kind of working capacity. I've gone to regionals. I've gone to, sanctionals and semifinals. I've paid my way to a lot of those things. Just putting myself in those environments has, obviously I get to see things, but I also get to meet people. And it's by talking to people that some of that perspective is created. I got the opportunity to know John Singleton pretty well over the past couple of years. And John Singleton has been around forever. He told me stories about competing in a parking lot at what was it called? Sanctionals or
yeah.
What were they called in 2010?
Sanctionals back in the day. Yep.
And watching Sam Briggs basically destroy all the guys at this competition in the same workout the men were doing. This is in 2010 in a parking lot somewhere in England. Mm-hmm. But I have the opportunity to talk to him and learn about that. So when I and I put a little disclaimer there that there are statistics that I've, aggregated for all of these athletes. But in addition, there are, factors that you can't see in a chart that, I try to approximate as best as I can how good these athletes would have been compared to each other when they competed 10 years apart. It's hard to do. I think it's important, though, in almost every sport that's out there, there's something like this, someone who's created the initiative for something like that. And in addition to looking backwards, I also have tried to look forward. And I've put out a list of the top 100 athletes for men and women going into next season. I think that that's important, too, to motivate people. And it's cool when athletes who didn't make that list message me and they'll say, dude, that's a sick list. I want to be on it next year.
That's cool. I also think it's fun because it elicits a little bit of controversy, too. I was very critical of you because of my Invictus bias when you put out the top 5 teams leading up to the CrossFit Games. And I was like, what the hell, man? Like, why doesn't Invictus ever get notoriety? And I threw Tommy Marquez under the bus on our most recent episode. It'll air tomorrow. And he was like, you make a valid point. They're always in the conversation within the last, 12 plus years. But there's always been a changing roster. There hasn't been like one superstar athlete. And I was like, yeah. But when the camera's sitting on Rich Froning and he's front squatting 385 and we've got Jorge Fernandez putting up 430, like just flip the script, change the narrative, call an audible. And obviously I have a tremendous bias over here. But what are your thoughts on that? Is it fun to get the scrutiny from fans like myself? Is it fun to get like the appraise and the pat on the back from people that agree with it? What's that kind of toggling like for you?
It definitely takes a thick skin,
yeah.
To put some stuff out there. And I understand that even if I was exactly right in every single ranking, still there's people that aren't going to like it. And of course, I'm not going to be right every time. In fact, it's far more likely that I'll be wrong than right. It's a really, really difficult thing to do. And when you talk about the teams division, it's so much harder because we have so much less information on so many of those teams. And like you said, the rosters are constantly changing. We can take Invictus. I know the 4 athletes on Invictus very well, but I don't really know the maximal potential that any one of them actually has. Alchama is probably the closest because he's been the closest to making it to the games, and he's tried to do it at a high level. And I've seen him compete, in strength and depth, and place in the top 10 there against a really good field. I've known him. I've talked to him. What an incredible person, by the way. But Jorge Fernandez, we're going to get a chance to see him at Rogue, which is great. Yeah. I thought he might actually go individual this year. It sounds like they're going to run it back, but I don't know that much about his potential. I know he's a strong guy. He did semifinals the year before, and I knew it could be really good. Devin Kim's really young, and if I'm just being super transparent, the biggest hesitancy for ranking Invictus in the top 5 was Brittany Weiss, who impressed me so much this year. I got a chance to see her and Haley Adams train before the 2017 regionals, maybe 18 regionals, and similar body type. Strength is always going to be an issue for them, often can be really exposing at the CrossFit Games. It's become, the team competition has become more of this thing where if one person is bad enough at one thing, that your team just can't succeed against some of these really great teams. What she's done with the skills that has, the genetics that she has, is a huge testament to her commitment to this sport, the work that she puts in year after year, and the foundation that she's built for herself to be able to express that fitness. So she was super impressive to me. They were super impressive to me, and I was super happy for them. Like, it doesn't make me upset that I ranked them 7th and they finished 3rd. Even Josh was like, he reached out to me. He's like, "You're firing us up, bro." And so maybe that's my hope when I put those things out. If the athletes see it, and I don't really care if they do or not, it's more for the fans than anything else, and the people who like to have these conversations, that they're either inspired by the belief I have in them, or that they're, motivated by wherever I put them that they're not happy with to prove me wrong. And either way, great.
I love that, man. It really elicits a fun component to the sport. It's also such a cool narrative to see people defy the odds a little bit and surprise some of the gentle analytics and, the perceived notions of their abilities. It's fun to watch. With that being said, a little bit controversial, but what were your thoughts on the Reykjavik team? They performed really well on the back half of the games, had a little bit of a hiccup on the traversing of the parallel bars. I loosely listened to Annie Thorisdottir kind of describe, were they going to put Katrin Davidsdottir in? Was it going to be Lauren? They were kind of dancing back and forth based on a gentle injury conversation. There was quite a bit of talk about them in the lead up, and then obviously lots of controversy in and around the 2022 CrossFit Games. What were your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts in general are that I thought it was a really kind of unprofessional approach from the CrossFit media this year to have basically the entire team competition be set up as Reykjavik versus Mayhem Freedom. The reason I say that is because there are very obviously a lot of other really good teams in the field, and it's just felt like a slight to teams like Invictus or Urban Energy or CrossFit Oslo and a half dozen others that either had proven themselves the year before, Pro in Montreal, or some of the newer ones that came up this year like Training Culture, that team out of Spain. And I think that while it's okay to feature those, that there could have been a little bit more of a broad perspective of building up just the depth that exists in the team division in addition to the strength at the top. And whatever the reasons that ended up happening for Reykjavik performing the way they did at the games, whether how serious Lauren's injury may have been or not, any of the drama surrounding that decision-making process the day or two leading into it, or the week or two leading into it, however long it was, at the end of the day, there were other teams that beat them. And I don't think that that's necessarily a mistake. Like, those teams are very good. And I thought that it was a bit of a miss to only focus on really those two teams the entire season from the media perspective of CrossFit.
Yeah. It's so interesting because they're trying to elicit all kinds of notoriety and perking of the eyebrows and attention to the sport. So I don't necessarily fault them for that, but then at the same time, there were a bunch of things missed for sure. And hopefully this is a really good constructive criticism and feedback for them to kind of take in and broaden their lens to try to highlight, more teams, more athletes, and more individuals along the way. Taking a little bit of a pivot away from the specificity of sport and looking more at CrossFit leadership, I've chatted about this quite a bit with a few different upper echelon individuals within the CrossFit space that are very well versed like yourself. Going back to the pandemic and the Glassman tweets, what's going through your brain at that moment in time? And, going through this gentle sequence of events, from there to Rosa to Castro to now Dan Fall, like, what are your thoughts on what's going on with CrossFit leadership?
Well, in general, my mindset with regard to this is not to be excessively responsive. So my full-time job is to coach at a CrossFit gym. Mm-hmm. And I had for a long time thought I wanted to own a CrossFit gym. I ended up deciding I did not want to do that because I don't really have that much interest in all of the business end side of things. I like coaching. I like the relationship building. I like watching athletes come from somewhere and get to somewhere. I like them realizing their potential. I like the community aspect, and I like facilitating all of that. But the gym that I coach at is a CrossFit gym. They affiliated in 2012, and just like probably most of the CrossFit gyms in the world, when that was happening in, I don't know, June, July of 2019, we were faced with a decision. Is this a company that we want to continue to align ourselves with? And my advice to them was, let's just wait and see. Like, there's no need to make a hasty decision here. And I think that in general in the world right now, that happens far too often, where people are just making hasty decisions based on very little information and an emotional response. And there could be a lot of reasons that we could explore in terms of psychology about why the world is trending in that direction. But that was just the advice that I kind of gave them. And at every step along the way, I've kind of taken that approach. At the surface, was it a good thing for Dave to be the CEO? Some people may say yes, some people may say no. Let's see what he does during the time that he's there. Give him a chance. Same thing with Rosa, same thing with the interim CEO, and same thing with Dan Fowle. So in the case of the newest, I don't know too much about the guy, except what the media's kind of put out there. I haven't had a chance to talk to him. I haven't seen him do anything significant yet, but I'm just going to reserve judgment on that until, and let it play out. I do think that that CrossFit in general could benefit from striving from some kind of consistency. And this is I almost talked about this with regards to athletes switching training camps too often. Like, if it's not working, it's not working. But at some point, you got to give something a chance for more than 6 months. And in the CrossFit case, there's been so much change of leadership in those, I don't know what you call them, C-suite positions or executive level positions over the past 2 to 3 years, that I don't think that we've really had a chance to gain any momentum. And that's the frustrating thing from the outside looking in, is like, I don't really care who it is, but let's put some people in place that have an agenda and an objective and give them a fair chance to move towards that thing. I don't know that much about the inner workings at HQ or home office or whatever they're calling it now, but I think that the goal there should be to strive for a consistent group of people with a consistent objective and give it an ample amount of time to try to get back on track.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's also unique because you mentioned your interest in coaching and community and watching the development of humans, not just in sport, but what they do in the gym, translating to being a more resilient, well-versed human outside of the gym. Better parents, all the things that unlock these human freedoms that are so primal and innate in within the human experience. But then on the other side of that is business logistics. We got to make money. We got to keep the lights on. We got to make sure, processes and procedures are in alignment for the growth and development of this sport. Now we got to look at relationships and sponsor relations. And then you see things like the controversial piece with Monster. And nobody really bats an eye that the very first sponsor of CrossFit was Panda Express. You see that, McDonald's and Sprite and some of these considered not necessarily healthy options are sponsors of the NBA and some of these other bigger sports, which help with TV rights and all these different things that help pay and professionalize the sport. I think there's this unique back and forth there, right? Where you've got business and then you've got community. And, there's a very unique challenge there where, Monster's making attempts to try to get a little bit healthier, but they also have a lot more money than some of these smaller drink companies or similar style companies. What are your thoughts here, as we see the growth and development of what I would probably describe as the professionalization of the sport and the challenge between old school CrossFit as we saw it, where there wasn't really any money in it, and now that we're seeing a little bit more dollars and cents being thrown around?
Yeah, I mean, something that comes to mind is just having a conversation, and if you're I mean, I'm kind of assuming here, but if you're Justin Berg and you're involved in the, gathering of sponsors for the CrossFit Games season, my assumption is that he's asking those questions of Monster. Hey, part of our DNA is health and sustainability of health over a lifetime. And your products aren't all necessarily in alignment with that. We are definitely interested in the financial opportunities that you can provide. But this is my concern. And I would just think that those conversations would be had. And then maybe he could say, we're super excited to announce this sponsorship with Monster. And we're aware that a lot of our communities could be asking questions about why we would partner with a brand who has represented this in the past. We were concerned about that too. We had those conversations with them. And this is what the output of that conversation was that makes us feel good about bringing them on as one of the pivotal sponsors in our sport. And in having them here is going to create the opportunity for us to do this and this. It's also going to create the opportunity for Monster to do this and this with the way that they want to move their business forward. And, I think that if those conversations are had and then some of that is shared as an announcement instead of just randomly putting Monster suddenly on the CrossFit Games page as one of the sponsors for people like us to say, well, that's kind of strange. And we're just speculating and making assumptions. Maybe just have that as part of your rollout when you're going to make that announcement and talk about it to the people that, Justin Berg knows what the CrossFit community stands for and what it's about. He's been around forever. He knows the principles and the tenets of the level 1 and the core curriculum of the methodology, and he's very understanding of what Greg's position was against Big Soda. So why not just be a little bit more transparent in announcing them as a sponsor and address the questions that the community is going to be asking?
I think you described that really well. Just a few things that I'd love to pull out based on what you've described so far, Brian, that I really appreciate is the power of the pause is what I kind of describe it as, where you're not just jumping to conclusions based on an emotional reaction in that particular heated or stressful moment. Just pause. Practice the art of stillness and just really, observe what's going on, information gather, and that will help you form my next point, which is context. So much of this is really controversial because of lack of context. And I think information gathering and being a little bit more patient before just word vomiting or making a really important decision can really help this sport a little bit too. The other thing is most things, and we know this from any kind of coaching relationship or personal relationship, most things can be solved with a conversation. And it's okay for you and I to disagree, but then have a safe space in the middle around, hey, I still respect you just because we disagree on said topic. And I think that's really important as a broad and inclusive thing to kind of share with the world, is remaining a little bit malleable. We're both open to being wrong. We're both open to observing and seeing the lenses of another human being. And then simultaneously, that creates transparency. That creates a mutual understanding of, hey, guess what? We're both just trying to navigate this human experience, or in this case, the growth and development of CrossFit in the right way. And I think there's a broad and inclusive mission to try to keep positively impacting lives, supporting the sport, getting athletes paid where they can do this for a full time, ensuring that the media crew is taken care of. And, I don't think there's necessarily a roadmap for this, but I definitely think that, through healthy conversations like this, we can help move the needle in the right direction without putting out fires seemingly every single week. What are your thoughts?
I love the way that sounds. One of my biggest frustrations this year is because there were so many distractions and so many people calling attention to them. And in some cases, I was part of that we were straying from what I want to be talking about, which is how impressive what's being displayed by the sport that these humans are able to achieve with their physical bodies and the competition element of it. And that's what I want to celebrate the most. I want to be able to draw more attention to more of the athletes that are doing that. And it's a little bit frustrating when week after week, the topic of the day is something that's negative or that's detracting from that.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think it's a challenge just because negativity sells. It's clickbait, enhances data analytics. But I also just truly believe that authenticity and vulnerability and truth will supersede in the long run. And so I appreciate all the things that you're doing on Morning Chalk Up. I'm a big fan. And where I'd like to take the conversation next, man, is this unique relationship between CrossFit sport and CrossFit health. Because what I see a lot of times within the general trajectory of a CrossFit gym is person walks in off the street, maybe they saw some online marketing and, had a consult with a coach, came in, they had an assessment, they did some sort of fundamentals, then they were integrated into a group class. For us, we have the dual track of performance and fitness. And then from there, they can potentially add in, strength or motor or some accessory things. They can also seek some sort of personal training. For most people, in my humble opinion, that's where it stays. And you can add or subtract based on those offerings that I just mentioned. But what I see oftentimes is this nudge or this perception that, oh, I'm supposed to be doing the heavy squat snatches and the ring muscle ups and the super complexity. That's where my fitness is supposed to go next. And in generalized health progression, I don't know if that's a reward. It's a greater risk for most people that are just trying to be better humans. But this perception is that they have to be pushed more towards sport. And then they're lesser than if they choose to scale. And I'm a little bit curious your thoughts on this and how that relates to optimizing the health, the wellness, the biomarkers of most recreational members, and how that progression and that education within the enhancement of one's fitness over time can improve.
That's a big question. Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but I have an OPEX certification.
Okay.
So I went through the OPEX CCP level 1,
James
I think
Fitzgerald.
in 2017.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. And if people are familiar, James Fitzgerald and Greg Glassman or CrossFit had a bit of a falling out around 2010 to 12 time period or so. But James has been training according to his own methodologies for decades, and Greg was also training people for his own methodology for decades. And then where I enter in is I consumed all of the CrossFit content that I could for years by reading journal articles, reading the level 1 material, taking the level 1 training through the methodology, coaching through the methodology. And then also I took a period of time and invested in the teaching that James is offering through OPEX. And my approach to these things was not to try to find out the differences or to focus on the points of tension, but rather to see where the similarities lie. And I had also a period of my time where I pursued spiritual or religious knowledge, and I approached that from the same mindset of not trying to say, well, what is better or worse about Christianity compared to Judaism compared to Islam, but where are the things that overlap? And so when it comes to fitness and health over a long period of time, and I still have not really heard a better explanation of what that is than I think Bergeron, I'm not sure if he was the first to say it, but the low trajectory to a distant horizon is the mindset that I approach health and fitness with, which is that I want to be able to do these things for a long period of time. And what are these things? It's to get out of breath and not be debilitated by it. It's to let, basically I think there are 3 main reasons to exercise. It's to sweat, to move blood, and to get out of breath. And that if you do those things regularly, that a lot of the biomarkers that you referred to that are going to be requiring, that your body will require to live a productive lifestyle over a long period of time, that you're checking the boxes to do that. And I am not a person who says, dude, you got to come to the CrossFit gym. If you're active in your lifestyle, I'm supportive of that. And that can be playing a sport. It can be a runner. It can be a dancer. It can be, so many different variety of things, and Pilates and yoga and all this stuff. But if you're someone who's sedentary in your lifestyle, I will, try to, in a subtle way, encourage you to become more active.
I think that's a phenomenal answer. I do think it's important to sweat, move blood, and get out of breath. I think those things are very, very cool. But to give a little bit of pushback, what are your thoughts on the thought process of somebody who, very similar to what we described previously around an athlete. Like, I want to do this competition, I want to do that competition. There's oftentimes members that are like, hey coach, I want to do the muscle up. And like, that is their sole focus, and it's receives so much notoriety and validation. And if they're not given that thing, then they leave, or they're feeling like they're not supported in their goals. I feel like this is a very common thing that people probably come in contact with within CrossFit gyms. And then simultaneously with that, how do you help people create education between what you described, which I would lean that more towards optimal health, versus how people really are craving this validation and this fun around sport?
Well, in the particular case of someone who's asking or striving to learn to do a specific thing, if I'm their coach and they tell me that, I would want to flesh out the conversation a little more. Why do you want to learn how to do a muscle up? Because basically in asking that question and listening to them respond to it, I'm going to learn about their psyche a little bit. Like, what are the things that drive them? And competition is something that drives people. And, I run 1 or 2 in-house competitions every year at our gym to give people an opportunity for that outlet. I think another thing that's, it's unusual. I think it's unusual to find a person that runs for a lifetime. They'll run 3 to 5 miles, 5 to 6 times a day, and that's their exercise over 60 years, because it gets boring, and people like new stuff and new challenges and new opportunities. And I think it's, I've been doing this for a long time. This is 9 years I've been doing CrossFit, but the way that I've approached CrossFit, training CrossFit, has changed, has ebbed and flowed year to year, and even within the years, as the reasons that I'm doing it, or the availability that I have to do it for more or less time on a weekly basis, changes. And I think that it's important to keep things new and fresh. It's also important to provide people opportunities, to have something to look forward to. There are a lot of members at our gym that will decide, I want to run a marathon, or I want to row a marathon, or I want to ride a century race, or I want to do a Spartan race, or whatever. And then they'll talk to me, well, how can we, is the training that I'm doing here by coming to the classes 4 to 5 times a week preparing me for that, or should I add something in additionally, or should I stop doing this altogether and just pursue that thing? And the answers to that question looks different for, everyone, I guess. But from a coaching perspective, for me, it's about building relationships with the people that I come in contact with, so that when those conversations come up, I hopefully can have some kind of understanding of who they are, what gets them going, what motivates them, what bothers them, and the ways that I can be supportive of them without setting them up for failure or injury, or to fall short of their goals.
For sure.
Sometimes that's readjusting what their goals are. But usually it doesn't help if I tell them. You have to make it so that they reframe their own mindset.
Yeah.
That usually works
Asking
well.
better questions, going back to what we described before, which is seeking to understand where's the why? What's the why? Why the why? And, the 5 whys, the famous questions, and just trying to really dig below the surface to understand what the athlete is craving in pursuit of that goal. Brian, it's been really, really fun to unpack some of these things. Your coaching relationship, your unique lenses on being an analyst. And you're a regular on The Bottom Line with Lauren Khalil. What's that kind of like, knowing that show gets a lot of notoriety, and there's always controversial topics that, you're always thrown into the limelight to dissect and kind of share your thoughts on all of these big matters? What's it been like, sharing that with Lauren over there?
Fun story. Lauren Khalil walked in as a drop-in during an open workout to the gym I was coaching at in Naples, Florida in 2017.
Yes.
And so I've known her for a long time, but obviously not in the same capacity as now. But it was pretty cool. I followed her career as a journalist after that. We just would stay kind of in friends. She was up in Green Bay area, just a little bit north of Chicago, for a few years before moving back to Syracuse. And, it was one of those things where we just had some touch points for a couple of years, and then they brought her on to the morning chalk up, and then I had opportunity to get to know her a lot better and to get to work with her more and get to learn some of the reasons why she wants to be involved in this space. And she has, I think anyone who knows her has been following her, has a fierce drive and desire to excel in the things that she's doing. Sometimes there's just things that are difficult to explain, but when we do those episodes, it just feels easy. It feels natural. She's a good question asker. She knows me fairly well and my work fairly well because she's been following it for a few years. So she understands where to push me and to challenge me, and where to kind of give me an opportunity to talk about certain things. It's not that easy to answer those questions that she asks. It's not that easy to talk about the topics that we often talk about. And I think that I'm able to do it because most of my jobs before this involved public speaking, and because as a hobby for years I invested in reading, learning, watching, and experiencing this sport and this community and this methodology in my own life, that provides, like you talked about earlier, a context to appreciate what's going on and not necessarily get drawn into the immediacy of whatever the topic is.
For sure, man. How does that contrast with being with the gently controversial Sivan? He loves to poke and pry a little bit and definitely dances off topic.
In a similar way, we just had a natural rapport. He invited me out to HQ and he wasn't there. I ended up doing the podcast with Tommy and Matt Bishel instead. It went well enough that he invited me to regionals to do this CrossFit podcast, which they had a full setup for, and it was live. And I never met the guy. And we just sat down and did an episode, and it was intimidating because there's no plan at all. Like, Lauren will lay out, okay, this is kind of the order of how I'm going to ask these things, and this is where we want to kind of go with this episode. Stefan would be like, all right, ready? Here we go. And then I never know what he's going to ask for the most part. And it was super intimidating originally, but then it was also kind of a big confidence build to know that I had created such a strong foundation of knowledge and the ability. I don't know why I can retain so much of the information I do about this sport, but that I could recall things as needed to answer his questions and not just be totally exposed as a fraud. It's different now than it was. When he was working for CrossFit. He's got a lot more diversity and freedom in his platform than he did back then. I intentionally choose not to be on the show, like for the live call-in shows or when the topics are about more controversial and political or social things. I'm super aware of what his beliefs and perspectives are on those, and I know that they are off-putting to many people. I try to just stay in my lane and talk about the things that I enjoy talking about, think that I know a lot about, and I've just communicated that with him so that we can continue to work together in an environment that's hopefully valuable for the people who digest it, and still a comfortable and fun environment for both of us.
I love that you draw that boundary with him. I'm sure that's a little bit challenging. Is he aware of his perception? And obviously his show does really well. The live call-in piece is definitely different and unique. He throws out all kinds of things all the time. I don't even really know how to put my finger on it. It's just kind of all over the place, but it seems to work. Like, what are his thoughts as to how the show goes? And is he like that offline too? I'm
not so sure about his thoughts on the show in general. I haven't really asked him that. Having conversations with him offline is different than online, but not that different. Mm-hmm. I think that depending on what content of his you consume, you can sometimes lose sight of who he is as a man, which is, supremely motivated and dedicated to his children and to raising them to be the types of humans that he thinks will thrive and help to make this world great. And I think that he invests so much of his time and energy in that. But if all you do is watch his shows, you'll get sprinkles of that, but maybe not a full understanding of it. Mm-hmm. Any time that I talk to him and it's off air, he is either driving his kids somewhere, with his kids at something, having them in the garage. I mean, when he's not working on the podcast, he's doing things for his children. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are people that know that and appreciate that about him. I think there are people that know that and can't appreciate it because they can't get past some of his points of views on controversial topics, which is unfortunate.
That's fair that you describe it that way. I'd actually love to have him on the show, pick his brain a little bit and seek to understand, create some context with, his growth and development, especially since branching off a little bit away from CrossFit. The next thing I'd love to discuss with you, Brian, is, since the media team kind of exploded a little bit, with some of the challenges during the Glassman controversy, I've seen the uprise of you. I've seen the Buttery Bros branch off and kind of do their own thing. I've seen Sean Woodland and Tommy Marquez explode with Talking Elite Fitness. We've seen Savan. And that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. You've also got Get With The Programming with Bill Grundler and Chase Ingram. There's a lot of different cool media outlets. And then you guys get to come together at the games a little bit. I don't know. I look back and I'm like, man, that probably sucked in the short term, trying to figure out the path. But then all of a sudden you're seeing a lot of good success for some really good people. What are your thoughts on, how the media is rising, but everybody's kind of doing it at the beat of their own drum?
I entered this picture at a very kind of pivotal time. The first year that Savan invited me to the games was 2018. We were meant to do a CrossFit podcast from the games that year, the way that we did it from regionals in Albany and in Del Mar. And Greg canceled that the day before.
Del Mar was the best, man.
Yeah, I keep hoping that
it was the best.
An event will reemerge in that venue. It was very, very cool.
West Coast Classic. We're calling for you.
I think they should do it. But I come there in 2018 and I think I'm going there to do one thing, and then it was shut down literally the day I was flying there. Savan said, come anyway, and he introduced me to Tyson Oldroyd. And Tyson Oldroyd was in charge of big branch of the media team that year. Savan was working more on some CrossFit health stuff at the games that year with Pat Sherwood and Greg and I think Rory McKernan maybe. And I had no idea the caliber of creator that I was given the opportunity to meet and work with that year at the games. And a lot of the people that you mentioned in some capacity were there. Sean and Tommy and Chase and Bill and Marston and Heber and but a lot of others like Mike Koslap, Dave Ray, and Michael Dalton, and Nico Rono, and and Lillian Fuentes, and a lot of people who people may or may not know who they are, but they are all still making a big impact in the CrossFit space. And yes, they've all branched out, and many of them have gone their own ways. Some of them have been brought back and now work for CrossFit again. Mariah Woodmore was on that team as well. I worked actually pretty closely with her that year. And it has been cool, like you said, maybe frustrating or unfortunate in the moment, in that month, in that year for a lot of those people. But it's been neat for me to watch each of them explore and try forging their own way. And I think a lot of them have been incredibly successful. I'm really proud of a lot of work that many of them have done, and I'm really grateful for the relationships I've had. And a lot of those people have given me opportunities to help me get to where I am as well. And I always try my best to remember that and to not forget about the people that gave me the opportunity before anyone knew who I was, which I think can be easy thing to do, to forget about that sometimes.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy they gave you an opportunity. I think your insight is incredibly impressive. We've danced around all over the CrossFit landscape today, and just your tidbits and your nuggets and bits of wisdom that you shared with me and our community. I'm blown away, man. You have a really cool lens on the sport. Your ability to pull and digest analytics and share it with people to help people understand, but also leaning back to that power of the pause and educating people on, let's just have a conversation. Let's create some transparency around all these different controversial topics. And yes, we can acknowledge the existence of certain spot fires, but let's stay on the mission and overarching goal of growing the sport. And my final question for you today, Brian, is what do you think is the future of CrossFit? What do you think is going to happen as far as professionalization and the growth and development and the challenges with the leadership team? Do you think it can develop consistency and really blossom and launch like we all are hopeful that it can?
The short answer is yes. I do think that can happen. The more in depth is, I think it's a pretty critical time. And I think that you might have been alluding to some of this way at the beginning of this conversation with drawing some references to other sports. And I wish I had a better grasp on minor sports over history, because I think that there's a time period where something can come up and exist and survive for a period of time, maybe at a plateau, like it gets somewhere and then it plateaus for a period of time and then it just falls apart and you never hear about it again. And I think that, we're approaching that time period where if things don't take an upward trajectory soon, that makes things a lot more predictable, consistent from primarily a financial perspective for all of the different people that are invested in it, that it'll be difficult to sustain stagnation, I guess. So I think that this is a critical moment in the history of the sport. My belief is, based on conversations that I've had and things I've observed, that there are enough people with enough investment and interest and humility to want to make this work, to set aside the egos that inevitably exist, to take the next steps to reach that, and I am optimistic that there is positive growth for many of the people or parties or entities involved over the next 3 to 5 years.
I love it, man. So does Tia retire?
You said that last thing was the last question.
I can't help it. You're unlocking new levels, man.
I have a feeling that she's not going to retire, but I have no context or reason to say that other than what my instinct is telling me.
So she's pulling a Scott Panchek. You son of a gun.
Well, you were talking about the time frame of athletes in this sport. Actually, last March, I started creating a list of athletes who'd retired within the last 12 months of last March. And there were maybe 15 or 16 notable names on that list, but many of them have then kind of not retired, actually. So I kind of scrapped that idea for now. Mm-hmm. But I do have it still there to draw back on, because I think that eventually it is worth investigating, what we've been talking about, what is sustainable for a top-end CrossFit athlete over time. And is a 3-year lifespan something that people should expect, or 6 years or 10 years? And what does it take to make those different things happen?
Mm-hmm. I'll leave you with this. I think you'll appreciate it. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and the famous conversation around, hey, what do you do? He was like, oh, I'm retired. And he works at like a shop. He works on cars and does all kinds of things. He's like, oh yeah, I just go to the shop because, I enjoy going there and I like spending my time there. And I thought it was a unique mindset where like cognitively you can be retired, but you're involving yourself in things that really fill your cup. You're passionate about them. It doesn't feel like work, and it truly is play. And that's where I think the creative and artistic nature floats to the surface, where people can truly express their peak expression and continue to seek their edges and share it with all of us viewing on the outside. So Brian, thank you so much for your time and energy and really answering some of these difficult questions that were packed into our conversation today. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I have Instagram, pretty active on there, Brian Friend CrossFit, and then regularly writing and contributing via video content on the Morning Chalk Up and on the Savon podcast. And I think those are probably the primary outlets where you can digest the work that I try to put together and provide for the community at large. For sure, man. Well, I'm excited to see you continue to develop and put out amazing content and fun, controversial lists that we can talk about. And hopefully I'll be able to cross paths with you at one of these, off-season competitions, if not at the games next year. Thank you so much today, man. For those of you listening, if you enjoyed my conversation with Brian, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Till next time. Thanks, Brian. Are you over 35 and in need of a solid training program? Are you looking to improve your athleticism and keep up with the younger athletes in your CrossFit gym? Then look no further than our Invictus Masters program. This program places year-round emphasis on mobility and stability exercises with movements that we have seen directly benefit our Masters athletes. Our program is led by Nicole DeHart and offers a training program designed specifically for Masters athletes who are looking to compete at a higher level in the sport of CrossFit. Some of our top Masters athletes in the world train with us, including CrossFit Games champion Kevin Kester, Matt Beals, and Pat Sprague. You can learn more about their stories
and the Invictus Masters program by checking out their episodes right here on the Invictus Mindset Podcast. If you'd like more information about the current training cycle or to join the Invictus Masters program, please email Nicole at invictusathlete.com. That's NICHOLE at invictusathlete.com. Breathing, movement, circulation, digestion. What do all these body functions have in common? Our muscles. There are over 600 muscles in the human body that are responsible for supporting our daily activities. That's why your muscle health is incredibly important. On this podcast, I always discuss seeking our peak expression and striving to maximize our human potential. And so I try to share with you the top products that I find on the market. My H&B is a clinically proven ingredient that has been shown to help build and maintain lean muscle mass, increase strength, improve recovery, and enhance body composition. Learn more about your muscle health at myhmb.com/Invictus. Once again, that's myhmb.com/Invictus. Enhance your muscle health and enhance your life.